What could have driven Homelander to such despair?
Is my son!
Homelander walked out of the cabin covered in blood. Even though he slaughtered the entire team, he still couldn't find out where his son Ryan was. In reality, Ryan had already been taken by Billy, but Billy knew all too well that Ryan couldn't stay with him, or he would eventually become a scumbag just like him. As long as his wife was living well, Billy could endure a lifetime of loneliness. He asked him to escort Becca and her son to Grace, as she was the only one who could protect them now. However, Stormfront suddenly descended from the sky, her hands releasing lightning that flipped their car. The car tumbled for a few rounds before coming to a stop. Billy rushed to rescue them, and fortunately, they were all unharmed. Told Billy to take Becca and her son and go while he and the others stayed behind to cover their retreat. Kimiko glared at the murderer of her brother but couldn't help but laugh. She signed something to Frenchie and had him relay her message. Kimiko and Stormfront smile at each other. The battle was about to begin. Starlight struck first, with Kimiko quickly closing in on Stormfront under her cover, landing 2 punches to her face. Just as Stormfront freed herself from Kimiko, she took a kick to the face from Starlight, then flipped and used an electric arc to blast Starlight away. Seeing this, Frenchie immediately tried to use the rocket launcher they had prepared. Stormfront, of course, wouldn't let them have their way. An electric arc entered the car first, causing the rocket launcher to explode. They were blown back by the blast. Kimiko seized the opportunity during Stormfront's attack to land a series of punches, grabbing her head and smashing it fiercely. Just as Kimiko was about to finish Stormfront off, she was struck by lightning from Stormfront's hands. Taking advantage of Kimiko's paralysis, Stormfront grabbed her and twisted her neck, snapping it. Frenchie is furious. They keep shooting at Stormfront with their pistols, but the normal bullets can't do any damage to Stormfront. Stormfront blasted them away with an electric arc. Now, only Starlight was left with the strength to fight, but it was clear she was no match for Stormfront either. The boys were on the brink of annihilation, but at that moment, Queen Maeve arrived. At this moment, Kimiko revived. She twisted her neck, snapped the broken tibia back into place, and prepared to rejoin the fight. In close combat, Stormfront was no match for the invincible Queen Maeve. Seized the moment to strike while she's down. Starlight and Kimiko also joined the battle. In the end, Stormfront couldn't withstand the combined assault of the three and, exhausted, fled hastily. Stormfront caught up with Billy. She thought, I can't defeat 3 superhumans, but 2 ordinary people with a child should be easy. But she underestimated a mother willing to risk her life to protect her son. Becca pulled out a knife and thrust it into Stormfront's left eye. Enraged, Stormfront yanked out the knife and grabbed Becca by the throat. Billy immediately drew his gun and fired at Stormfront in a frenzy. Seeing that the bullets had no effect, Billy picked up a crowbar and swung it at Stormfront, but it was useless. Ryan, sobbing, pleaded with Stormfront to let go. Seeing Becca's breath growing weaker, Ryan finally snapped. His eyes glowed a strange red, a flash of white light, and the world fell silent. When Billy woke up again, he saw Stormfront, missing limbs and barely clinging to life. He thought the trouble was over, but for some reason, Ryan kept muttering, I'm sorry. When Billy turned around, he saw Becca, gravely injured. Ryan's blast had pierced not only Stormfront but also accidentally wounded Becca. Billy urgently pressed on her wound, begging Becca to hold on, but miracles are rare. In her final moments, Becca begged Billy to forgive Ryan and make sure he knew it wasn't his fault.
You promised me you'd keep him safe.
Billy nodded, giving his wife one last promise. With Billy's assurance, Becca took her final breath. Billy had searched for Becca for so long, never imagining it would end like this. The pain in his heart far exceeded any physical torment. He left a gentle kiss on Becca's forehead, picked up the fallen crowbar, and stood up slowly, his eyes filled with indescribable hatred. At that moment, Homelander arrived, descending slowly from the sky, his eyes brimming with sorrow. Looking at the disfigured Stormfront, Homelander felt a surge of mixed emotions as scenes from the past flooded his mind. His former lover ended up like this, and his own son hid behind someone else. At this moment, how deep must Homelander's despair be?
Stop. You're gonna let them go. You're gonna leave me and Elena alone. You're gonna stop hunting Starlight. Or I release this.
If you do that, I'll destroy everything.
As long as everyone sees what a monster you are. As long as no one ever loves you again.
Now, Homelander had lost his lover and his son. He couldn't afford to lose the people's love too. With no other choice, he had to endure the immense pain and let Billy and Ryan leave. Later, VOD International CEO Stan held a press conference, placing all the blame on the crippled Stormfront and announcing the indefinite delay of Compound V's release. Homelander publicly apologized to Starlight, claiming that her betrayal was a frame-up by Stormfront. He welcomed her back to the Seven, stating that both Starlight and Queen Maeve were his closest comrades. Yet, when Homelander spoke these words, there was an indescribable emptiness in his eyes. A-Train, who betrayed Stormfront, was hailed as a hero against Nazism, taking back his spot on the Seven from the Deep. The Deep's journey back to the team was arduous and lengthy. Billy gave his amulet to Ryan and entrusted Colonel Grace with his care. Through Grace's efforts, all charges against the boys' members were dropped. Victoria also provided funding to secretly form a team to monitor Supes. She hoped Billy would continue to lead them. Billy gave no definite answer. He put on his sunglasses and left in silence, cleared of charges. Finally reunited with his beloved wife and daughter, Frenchie and Kimiko waltzed beautifully into their honeymoon. Huey and Starlight officially began their romantic relationship. Though Billy stopped overseeing Supes, Huey didn't give up. He sought out Victoria, hoping to continue his fight against VOD International. But this seemingly kind and amiable supervisor was not as simple as Huey imagined. The leader of the church had just finished a pleasant conversation with Victoria. Before he could hang up his phone, his head exploded. Victoria stood outside the main building of the church, staring at the splattered blood on the window with a cold smile. No one knew Victoria was a Supe, let alone that she was the dreaded head popper. Having lost everything, Homelander stood atop a tower, venting his frustration unabashedly. He was a child grown in a test tube, with no understanding of what it means to have a father or a mother. A 4-meter square lab was his home. His only toy was a worn-out blanket. His demands were few. As long as someone visited him daily, he was content. But to others, he was nothing more than a caged lab rat. But even this lab-grown rat had lofty ideals. No matter how much ridicule and scorn he faced, he still did his best to fight crime. After subduing criminals, he never sought credit, often giving the glory to others. He never hesitated to praise anyone with dreams. As the leader of the Seven, he frequently reminded his team what they should and shouldn't do. Though he was strict with his teammates, he was the first to offer support when a teammate lost a loved one. Despite his high status, he never forgot his original intentions. Doesn't such a hero, who serves the country and its people, deserve to be cheered by everyone? Yet, who would have thought that the seemingly beloved Homelander was the one most in need of love? When unrecognized by the public, he would find a quiet corner to cry silently. So alone. After all, he was just a child who had never known maternal love. Only through milk could he feel a taste of a mother's love. Fortunately, he still had a lovely son. To give his son a complete childhood, he often spent time playing with him, using his unique ways to train his son's superpowers. The days were simple and joyful, but the good times didn't last long. During a mission, his mistake caused a plane crash. He knew he couldn't lift a plane like Superman, yet faced with the pleading eyes of a little girl, he told a comforting lie. But he wasn't a god. In the end, he could only save his teammate, Queen Maeve. He believed that with Queen Maeve's abilities, she could save more people in the future. Though he felt sorrow for this, it left him with a vulnerability. What he didn't expect was that the one who betrayed him was his most trusted teammate, Queen Maeve. His former lover was now a cripple, his beloved son turned to the enemy, and even the people's adoration had become a bargaining chip for threats. All his ambitions vanished in an instant. Homelander ultimately became a slave to the powerful, a puppet at their disposal. Due to his girlfriend's Nazi affiliation being exposed, VOD International, to salvage their image, forced him to star in an anti-Nazi film. They found someone to play his girlfriend, Stormfront, while he, as the force of justice, stood against Stormfront. The battle was about to begin.
Guess this means we're breaking up. Nazi.
In the end, Homelander led the Seven to defeat the embodiment of evil. Homelander watched the movie expressionlessly, but he felt incredibly empty inside. Love itself wasn't wrong. The mistake was loving someone he shouldn't have loved. He had done everything he could to please others, but he was no longer the darling under the spotlight. Instead, the new member of the Seven, Starlight, had taken that place, and he could only step back. Even so, the media refused to let him off the hook, questioning why he didn't know that Stormfront had ties to the Nazis.
I may be a superhero, but I'm also just a man who fell in love with the wrong woman. bulletproof on the outside, but in here, it isn't.
He repeated the same answer countless times. Though he knew he had loved the wrong person, he never regretted it. He still visited the crippled Stormfront regularly, in order to give Stormfront the motivation to live. He would bring her a cup of hand-brewed coffee every time Homelander visited her. Unexpectedly, Stormfront tried to exploit this, attempting to control Homelander to build a superhuman army. Homelander resolutely refused. As a result of Stormfront's negative influence, Homelander's popularity ratings plummeted and he was forced to step down as captain of the Seven and replace him with Starlight. This news was a huge blow to Homelander, yet he had to put on a fake smile and do media promotions with Starlight. But the heartbreak didn't end there. Homelander knew A-Train had heart problems and couldn't consume too much fat. He used reverse psychology to remind him, but A-Train not only ignored the advice but also cursed him behind his back. But Homelander had super hearing, and his pride couldn't tolerate this. Seeing A-Train apologize in time, Homelander suppressed his anger and walked away. This scene was witnessed by Queen Maeve, hiding in the shadows. Worried, she sent a text to Billy. They arranged to meet that evening. Queen Maeve had been secretly providing Billy with information on superhuman crimes. This time, she brought two pieces of news. One was about Termite, who was wreaking havoc and needed to be dealt with urgently. The other was about Soldier Boy. Soldier Boy was the leader of the Payback team. Rumor had it he died in a nuclear accident in 1984, but in reality, he was killed by a weapon called BCL Red. If this weapon could kill Soldier Boy, it could also kill Homelander. Queen Maeve believes that Homelander is on the verge of going berserk and that they must plan ahead. Before leaving, Queen Maeve gives Billy 3 green vials. These are the latest V24 serums developed by VOD International, which can grant the user superpowers for 24 hours and are currently priced at $2 million each. He can use them as a precaution while investigating the members of Payback. However, Billy despises soups, and as soon as Queen Maeve leaves, he immediately considers throwing the V24 away. But just then, a strange noise comes from outside, and Billy hurriedly hides the vials to face the unexpected visitor. Homelander asks him about the whereabouts of his son, and when he doesn't get an answer, he reveals his true intentions. He was deeply dissatisfied with the insider dealings of VOD International and the authorities. He also knew that Billy, like himself, was just a pawn in the hands of those in power, and an outdated one at that. Homelander is unwilling to accept the status quo and wants to join forces with Billy to fight against the elites, after which they can have a man-to-man showdown.
More than anything.
But Billy's eyes were on the hidden V24 when he said this. When Billy turns his head back, Homelander has already disappeared. As if he had never been there, the superhero Termite has the ability to enlarge and shrink his body at will, but he uses it for the most depraved activities. Termite especially loves to explore inside other people's bodies, regardless of whether they are male or female. Unexpectedly, he merely sneezed and accidentally caused that person to explode. Frenchie hears the screams and rushes into the room, and seeing the scene before him, he wishes he could slap himself. But now, it's too late to run. Termite rapidly shrinks, and before Frenchie can find him, Termite throws him across the room. Clearly, Termite intends to kill to silence him. Termite quickly crawls into Frenchie's pant leg. Kimiko rushes over upon hearing the commotion and frantically searches Frenchie's pants, but just as she grabs Termite, he bites her hand. Kimiko, in pain, immediately let go, but as a result, she was also thrown against the wall by Termite. Frenchie panics and pulls out his gun, but he doesn't know where to aim. While he hesitates, Termite grabs his leg and knocks him out. Then, Termite launches himself towards Frenchie's mouth, but just before he can enter, he is caught in a suddenly appearing bag. It turns out that Billy had arrived. He poured a handful of white powder into the bag and then shook it vigorously. After he had mixed it thoroughly, Termite was completely high. Billy raised his hand, ready to crush him, but Termite pleaded for mercy. In the end, Billy restrained himself and decided to hand Termite over to the Bureau of Superhuman Affairs. This unusual behavior immediately aroused Frenchie's suspicion. Billy explained that the higher-ups had ordered him to spare Termite's life. In the past, Billy would have slapped Termite to death without a second thought, but since his wife Becca's death, Billy had changed. He diligently kept his promise to her, taking care of Ryan and even playing games with him from time to time. Colonel Grace was pleased with Billy's transformation, even hoping he might retire from the fight against soups like him did. But Billy clearly had his own ideas. His obsession with eliminating soups was too deep. Even if he couldn't kill those scumbags himself, he wanted them to face justice. To him, Termite was just a stepping stone, a way to test the attitude of the higher-ups. And Billy's so-called higher-up was actually Huey. This kid has been quite lucky lately. Not only is he living with Starlight, but his sharp mind has also earned him the position of deputy director at the Bureau of Superhuman Affairs. But today was the worst day ever for Huey. A strange man named Tony came to the office, insisting on seeing Nadia, but the direction he pointed was at a portrait of Director Victoria, and he claimed they were friends. Huey thinks it's unusual, but he can't figure it out. What puzzled him even more was that Termite, whom they had finally captured, was ordered to be released by Victoria. The reason given was that Vought International needed Termite to endorse an anti-termite product. Although Huey was displeased with this decision, he couldn't argue given that the superhuman population had decreased by 60% over the past year, a success attributed to Victoria's leadership. Huey reluctantly accepted it, but his understanding didn't mean Billy could understand it. That scumbag had blown a person in half and almost killed Frenchie. Billy regretted not finishing Termite off on the spot. The two brothers had a heated argument and ultimately decided to go their separate ways. Feeling downcast, Huey sought out Starlight to vent his frustrations, only to find her happily chatting with someone else. That someone was Starlight's first boyfriend, Supersonic. A top contender to join the Seven, an unprecedented sense of crisis surged within Huey, and he instinctively moved closer to Starlight. Seeing them rekindle old feelings made Huey intensely jealous, and in the heat of the argument, he blurted out something without thinking.
Wait, you mean like your boyfriend?
Seeing Starlight's expression, Huey immediately realized he had said something wrong. In the end, they parted on bad terms as well. After barely surviving a terrible day, Huey saw Tony again just before clocking out. Driven by curiosity, Huey followed Tony into a secluded alley and discovered that Victoria was there as well. His intuition told him that something was definitely off. It seemed Tony and Victoria did know each other, but Victoria looked particularly anxious about his presence. Tony pleaded with Victoria to speak out for Red River. At first, she seemed extremely reluctant, but finally, she appeared to make a decision and agreed to Tony's request. Tony was visibly happy and gratefully hugged Victoria, but his joy was short-lived. Soon after, he started bleeding from his nose. Realizing this, he immediately shoved Victoria away, who then collided with the trash bin where Huey was hiding. Tony rushed forward to cover Victoria's eyes, but Victoria forcefully pried one of his hands off, and her pupils began to turn white. Tony's hand instantly exploded. The scene terrified Huey. Tony quickly used his other hand to press down on Victoria's head to avoid her deadly gaze, but Tony was already barely holding on. With just a sidelong glance from Victoria, his jaw instantly exploded into a gaping hole. 2 more eye blasts from Victoria, and Tony was left with only half a face.
Why'd you have to come looking for me?
By then, even if Tony wanted to answer her, he couldn't. In the end, he was blown to bits by Victoria, scattering bloody smoke all over the sky. Huey was so scared he didn't dare breathe. He never imagined that Victoria was the infamous head popper. Afterward, Huey began to investigate and found that the Red River Tony mentioned was a welfare institution under Vought. Starlight suggested sending Billy to deal with the matter, but Huey refused. If Billy found out he had been the deputy to the head popper for a year, he would end up worse than Tony. Huey wanted to handle it alone. Starlight told Huey to just think about it and do nothing until she got home. Huey knew that everyone looked down on him, and it made sense. He was a grown man who couldn't even open a can by himself. Frustrated, he smashed the can open, accidentally injuring himself. Really useless. Instinctively, Huey called Starlight for help, but Supersonic answered the phone instead. Feeling another surge of crisis, he didn't want to be a worthless loser anymore. So, he made a bold decision. Even if Red River was a dangerous place, he was determined to venture in. This orphanage, under the guise of charity, was collecting all sorts of superhuman children. Some could move objects with their minds, others could defy the laws of physics, some could even teleport. Even the fearsome head popper might have originated from this orphanage. To verify this, Huey pretended to be an administrator from Vought International, planning to steal the orphanage's files. Unfortunately, the TV overhead was broadcasting a video of him and Starlight. Fearing the director would recognize him, Huey was about to lead her away when a boy suddenly appeared and pointed at the TV. Huey's cover was blown, and Vanessa asked him to leave, claiming the Bureau of Superhuman Affairs had no right to enter. Thinking quickly, Huey said that he and Starlight had always wanted a child, but he was infertile. His superb acting actually convinced Vanessa. Vanessa was, of course, eager to have these children adopted. After all, with a superhuman mother, the chances of the parents dying at the hands of the child would be much lower. She then boasted to Huey about how well-behaved the children were. As Huey nodded along, he discreetly inserted a pre-prepared USB drive into the main computer. After downloading the data, Huey immediately searched for the Head Popper's file. He discovered a shocking secret. Head Popper's real name was Nadia, and she had killed her biological parents when her powers went out of control. She was adopted after entering the Red River Orphanage, and the person who adopted her was none other than Stan, the CEO of Vought International. At this point, Huey finally understood everything. The hearing they had painstakingly organized was a complete joke, because Nadia was now Victoria, who was ostensibly the director of the Bureau of Superhuman Affairs fighting against Vought International, was secretly Stan Edgar's daughter. What a perfect scheme. Huey is scared to death to learn the truth, but he has to go back to work. As a result, he was blocked by Victoria just as he entered the office. Victoria's opening statement was a bombshell.
So who's Nadia?
Don't panic and watch Huey's performance.
Yeah. No, there was a guy, and he was looking at your picture. He said your name was Nadia, said he knew you from like way back when.
You weren't gonna tell me?
I know, I mean, it was just some guy off his meds, seemed like, yeah.
Victoria, seeing Huey's flawless responses, asked him what he had done in the morning and how he had injured his hand. She was clearly suspicious that Huey had been hurt by those superhuman kids. When Huey doesn't know how to explain, Starlight suddenly appears from behind him to help Huey out. She said that Huey had been with her all morning, making a lot of noise. Huey also flirted with Starlight. Victoria, clearly uncomfortable, quickly left. Fortunately, their seamless cooperation prevented their heads from ending up like those in the photos. Starlight was shocked by the truth, but what Huey said next stunned her even more.
I may have signed us up to adopt a child.
The situation had escalated beyond Huey's expectations, so he told Billy everything. Now, trying to take down Vought International through normal means was a pipe dream. Their only hope was for the boys to become even bigger scumbags and more ruthless than their enemies. But that was easier said than done. M had turned into a super dad. Frenchie and Kimiko, those still in the team, were completely absorbed in their romance. To unite the team, Billy used the investigation of Soldier Boy's death as an excuse, hoping would rejoin the group. If there was a weapon that could kill Soldier Boy, it could also kill Homelander. Billy decided to start with Soldier Boy's teammates. Frenchie was tasked with investigating Crimson Countess. Billy took on the investigation of Gunpowder, and Soldier Boy was assigned to because Soldier Boy had killed M's parents. Billy thought getting back on the team would be a piece of cake, but he was rejected. Billy glanced at M's daughter and immediately understood his concerns. However, the trip wasn't entirely fruitless as provided a lead. Some dirt on Gunpowder. After reading it, Billy gave a meaningful look. Really can't get over his father's murder. For years, he had been secretly investigating Payback, spreading out all the clues until they covered the entire room. While was lost in thought, he suddenly heard the smoke alarm. He quickly put out the fire and then used a stick to knock the alarm off. The buzzing noise drove him crazy, and it wasn't until he smashed the alarm to pieces that he calmed down. But M's actions had frightened his daughter, Janine, who instinctively took 2 steps back when he approached. It was only then that realized that as long as he couldn't resolve his inner turmoil, he could never truly reunite with Janine. So he sent Janine back to his ex-wife Monique's house and hoped to listen to Monique's advice.
But you should go do what you have to do. We'll be right here, waiting.
Monique's words undoubtedly gave him a strong dose of encouragement. Rejoined the boys, and shortly after, so did Huey. The boys were finally back together, but Billy raised a concern. If Huey just didn't return to work, he'd arouse Victoria's suspicion, and his head could explode at any moment. Of course, Huey already had a plan.
Can you please, break my arm?
He knew faking an illness wouldn't fool Victoria. Frenchie, worried about his friend, tossed him a bottle of marijuana, but Huey refused because it would make his drug test positive. He decided to tough it out. Billy was surprised at Huey's resolve, and even looked at him with newfound respect. Huey signals Kimiko to do it on the count of 3.
2.
Then they began their investigation into Payback. Their first target was Crimson Countess. Once a popular figure, she had now fallen to performing cheap tricks with her superpowers as an over-the-hill singer. Kimiko approached Crimson Countess, pretending to be a fan. Crimson Countess was surprisingly kind and even showed Kimiko her latest music video. While Crimson Countess was distracted, Kimiko pinned her against the wall. As long as she kept Crimson Countess's hands apart, she couldn't use her powers. Frenchie was about to question Crimson Countess when a few people entered the dressing room. Crimson Countess escapes from the locker room while they are distracted, followed by Kimiko. Crimson Countess suddenly stopped and formed a giant fireball in her hands, launching it at them. Luckily, they dodged in time and avoided being blown to pieces. By the time they recovered, Crimson Countess had vanished. When Billy pulled out his gun, the security guard wasn't nervous but instead briefly showed disdain. Then, awkwardly complimenting Billy's gun, he let him in. It turned out that this was a gun expo. Not only could adults carry firearms, but even children were allowed to play with weapons. Billy shook his head in disbelief. How could they educate children like this? Even more absurd was that they were openly brainwashing the public to arm themselves, including women and children. The purpose, of course, was to sell more guns. What a cunning scheme. Billy stared coldly at Gunpowder on the stage, calculating how to get him to talk. He took advantage of Gunpowder's bathroom break, pretending to be a fan to coax him into revealing the cause of Soldier Boy's death. When Gunpowder refused to budge, Billy threatened to expose his dark secrets. If your fans found out you were abused by Soldier Boy, you'd be a laughingstock. To his surprise, Gunpowder remained defiant, insisting Billy was talking nonsense. Just as Billy thought he was getting nowhere, he saw a dangerous signal in the rearview mirror and dodged just in time to save his life. It seemed Gunpowder intended to kill him to silence him. Billy wasn't about to sit idly by. He used a car as cover, waiting for the right moment to strike. But when it came to gunfights, Gunpowder was an expert. Billy hadn't even located him before a ricocheted bullet hit his left leg. Realizing his position was compromised, Billy quickly moved to another spot. He thought hiding behind a pillar would keep him safe, but he was sorely mistaken. Gunpowder walked out confidently, locking onto Billy's position in the mirror, calculating the trajectory in milliseconds. He pulled the trigger, and the bullet shot out. The most unbelievable part was about to come. This was what you called a bullet with eyes. Billy couldn't believe Gunpowder's terrifying marksmanship. If the bullet had deviated even a centimeter, his head would have been blown apart. Their shooting skills were on completely different levels. Thinking quickly, Billy started his own bizarre maneuver, shooting all his bullets at the car. Gunpowder was stunned by Billy's unexpected tactic. When Gunpowder reached the pillar, he found only a pool of blood on the ground. Billy was already gone. This incident taught Billy a harsh lesson. If even a second-tier superhero was this terrifying, how could he ever hope to take down Homelander? Feeling disheartened, he opened the video Ryan had sent him. In it, he heard his deceased wife's voice. After closing the laptop, Billy finally understood Ryan's intentions. Ryan loved him. In that moment, Billy's heart wasn't just filled with hatred. A strong protective urge surged within him. He took out V24, deciding to turn himself into a monster. Just then, he heard Homelander's voice behind him.
You really gonna shoot that shit in your veins? Odds are you'll die screaming.
Billy realized that a person with a conscience could never win against those superheroes. He finally turned himself into a complete bastard. At this point, Gunpowder had no idea trouble was looming. He saw that Billy was as cocky as ever. Gunpowder fired 3 shots, and Billy fell to the ground. Gunpowder couldn't believe Billy was so easily taken down. However, in the next second, his smile vanished. Billy slowly stood up, the 3 bullets falling to the ground. Billy gave a sinister smile. What followed was a one-sided massacre. With just one hand, Billy snapped Gunpowder's Desert Eagle. One headbutt knocked Gunpowder to the ground. Gunpowder got up to fight back, but his punches on Billy were like stones thrown into the ocean, not causing even a ripple. Billy backhanded a punch, sending Gunpowder flying several meters, crashing into a car. Billy then grabbed Gunpowder by the collar and beat him mercilessly. Gunpowder quickly knelt and begged for mercy. Half of his teeth knocked out by Billy. He knew if he didn't confess, Billy would beat him to death. From Gunpowder, Billy learned that Soldier Boy didn't die from a nuclear leak, but the exact cause was unknown. However, they were working for the CIA at the time, so perhaps they knew more details, and the person in charge happened to be Colonel Grace, the founder of the boys. But even though Gunpowder had confessed everything, Billy still didn't plan to let him go. He kept punching Gunpowder in the face, blow after blow. At that moment, he was no longer Billy, but a blood-soaked god of death. His emotions grew increasingly intense, his superpowers uncontrollable. Billy's eyes glowed with a golden light, and 2 laser beams shot out. Billy quickly closed his eyes, but such powerful abilities are not so easily controlled. When Billy came back to his senses, he saw that not only the car but also Gunpowder's head was sliced in half. Now was not the time to be shocked by his own powers. He needed to find Colonel Grace quickly to get to the bottom of things. Ryan was especially happy to see Billy, but for some reason, he felt that Billy was deliberately avoiding his hugs. Billy confronted Grace directly, asking her about her relationship with Payback, but Grace claimed she didn't know anything about Payback. Clearly, Billy had anticipated this response, so he had borrowed a ledger from Grace's safe in advance. The ledger recorded the payment transactions of agents worldwide. Once those records were made public, everyone who had worked for Grace would be doomed. Hearing this, Grace had no choice but to tell the truth. Back then, she was a commander fighting against the rebels and hired Payback for this purpose. To her surprise, these so-called superheroes were a bunch of incompetent fools, each more ridiculous than the last. Swatto flew into the sky just to show off. Gunpowder spent all day cleaning his gun but never fired a single shot. The TNT twins were just two solar-powered heating panels. Black Noir was obsessed with fame and refused to wear his helmet. The most absurd was Soldier Boy, who wanted to blow up their own armory with a rocket launcher just to see a fireworks show. They weren't just laughable, they were also cowards. Swatto's showmanship just now exposed the location of the troops, but in order to escape, these guys even pointed the spear at their own people. Black Noir was killing everyone he saw. Swatto was blasted to bits by an enemy rocket as soon as he flew into the sky. The most infuriating was Gunpowder, who, in his first attempt at shooting, killed only his allies and even chased after Grace. At that moment, a missile struck, sending Grace flying. She had barely gotten up and started to run when another explosion knocked her out. When she came to, the entire army was wiped out. Only Payback members had survived thanks to their excellent survival skills. Except for Black Noir, whose head was injured in the blast. Crimson Countess then ran over to tell Grace that Soldier Boy was killed by some Russian weapon and they took his body. In the end, the higher-ups covered up the incident, but Billy was not satisfied with this story. No matter what Grace explained, it was too late because Billy had already backed himself into a corner. Billy went to the bathroom and vomited violently, clearly suffering from the side effects of V24. His powers were spiraling out of control again. After what felt like an eternity, Billy finally managed to suppress his rampaging self. Despite his efforts to hide it, he couldn't fool Ryan. Ryan was still worried about him and urged Billy to rest. When Billy insisted on leaving, Ryan grabbed his wrist.
You said you'd always watch out for me!
Ryan, let go.
No, I won't let you!
Well, maybe I don't want to look at you. After what you'd done to my Becca, did you ever think about it?
Billy's words broke Ryan's heart. The red glow in Ryan's eyes was his uncontrollable anger. He ripped off the talisman Billy had given him and smashed it to the ground. Ryan left in a rage, but Billy was just as upset. Perhaps Ryan's dependence on him was his greatest inner demon.